you should not learn Hangul or Hangul, depending on how you want to pronounce it, until you're already fluent in Korean. Now, this is going to come to a surprise to many of you, especially if you're a new Korean learner, and especially if you've already got a decent amount of Korean under your belt and you've been learning Hangul, right? Reading. And the thing is, this applies to every single natural language, whether it be Korean, Japanese, Chinese, English, whatever language you're learning. You shouldn't learn the alphabet first. And you should actually get really good at the language. And then once you're really good at the language, then you should start to learn how to read. And then after you start to learn how to read, reading will take you to the native-like level, right? So this is the I Speak Korean Pretty Well podcast, and my name's John. My voice is a little hoarse today just because this past weekend there was a big pickleball event in New York, Major League Pickleball, and I was hooting and hollering and cheering, and so my voice is a little gone. But I'm going to try to convince you why learning Hangul at the start of your Korean language learning journey, or if you're still a beginner, why you shouldn't do it. And this is going to be counterintuitive to pretty much most people. And here we go. So just to basically give you some background information, when I started learning Korean, that's how I started learning, right? Hangul, because that's what you think you should do. Everyone and their grandmother, and for the past 100 years in foreign language education, we are taught to read first, which is ridiculous. This should never happen because it's not natural. But that's what we all do. So I tried that too. And turns out, though, I got lucky because the majority of my time spent learning Korean, let's call it 75% plus, was either audio or visual, and it wasn't reading. But if right now the majority of what you do to learn Korean at a beginning stage is reading, like think about how many hours a day you're putting in, and think about how many hours of those are spent reading, whether it be books, whether it be translations, whether it be watching shows with Korean subtitles, right? Even that's reading. If that's the majority of how you're learning Korean, you're doing it wrong. I'm going to try to convince you why. Okay. So I got my coffee here. And let's see if I can convince you. Okay. So basically, reading is a very unnatural process to humans. It does not happen in nature, right? Unlike spoken language. When it comes to spoken language, humans are put in an environment where other people are speaking and we naturally absorb it. Whether you're, whether you move to a new country and you're in that environment, or whether you're born in whatever country you're born in and the people around you are speaking it and you grow up with that language as your mother tongue. If you're exposed to enough spoken language for a long period of time, you will acquire that language. That's how 8 billion plus people on this earth acquired their mother tongue and other languages. And this is the most effective way to learn a language, especially when you want to get to a native-like level, native-like fluency. But nowhere in nature does the human brain come across written text and just acquire it naturally. That doesn't happen. But however, spoken language, our brains are wired to just acquire it without much effort. Now, when I say without much effort, I don't mean it's not a long, arduous process for our brains to do, but we don't actually put in any effort. And we will still learn that spoken language if we're exposed to that language for a long enough period of time. Words aren't like that. Text is not like that. So, and throughout this video, I'm going to say some things that, require a lot of fact checking. But the thing is, I would just say look up Merriam-Webster. She is one of the leading, I don't know this word or this phrase in English, 독서 전문가. But it's I was actually doing some dishes before and I was trying to think of how to explain this. 독서 전문가 is the Korean word for someone in the reading professional. So Merriam-Webster is an author. She's also a professor and a researcher, and she has a whole bunch of books on how our brains learn to read. But the thing about reading is this. here is how humans learn to read. We are taught how to read by another person or by a show or by some. We are actually like taught. You can't just see letters and then naturally like acquire it. That doesn't happen. We have to study it, or it has to be taught to us from someone else. This is the first thing. It is not a thing that happens in nature. Unlike spoken word. If you want to learn Korean, if you want to learn Japanese, you want to learn Russian, if you're just listening and watching those languages all the time, you're going to pick it up. That's just what happens because our brains are wired like that. But what happens with written language is that we're first taught it, right? We're taught by a teacher, by a parent, by a friend, by an educational program, and we start to recognize the written language. What happens is, after a lot of practice, then, this is kind of crazy too, our brains, after a lot of reading practice, our brains start to rewire and use the networks that acquire language and then kind of, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I'm going to explain it this way, and use the networks in our brains that acquire language and start to adapt them for reading. So then eventually, once you become a really good reader, is this recording? Okay, good. Once you become a really good reader, then actually you do acquire language through written text alone. Once you become a 숙련된 독서가, when you become a good reader, right? Then all of a sudden, just by reading words, you start to acquire the language itself. And that's what does bring us up to a really native-like fluency in the language we're trying to learn. For most people watching this episode, it's probably going to be Korean. And so it's a weird thing. If you want to get good at spoken Korean, you have to listen to and watch with your eyes and listen to a lot of spoken Korean. But if you want to read, it has to be taught to you directly. And this might not make a lot of sense to people at first, but it's just the way our brains work. Once we're taught the written language, we, through reading practice, eventually get used to the letters, and then eventually can start to acquire language through reading. But spoken language, it just happens immediately. We start to acquire it immediately. Okay, now why does this all matter and what does it mean? The issue with learning how to, well, first of all, if you just want to look at like sort of what's happened throughout traditional foreign language education, if reading was a good way to start learning a foreign language, we'd all be fluent in the languages that we were taught in high school or in junior high school, right? I'd be fluent in Spanish. You'd be fluent in Italian. You'd be fluent in French. Whatever language that you were learning in high school, if reading was like a good way to start to learn a language, then we'd all be really good at the languages we learned in high school because that's how we were taught them, right? But it's really bad because this is a very, 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 very important scientific fact. And check this out if you want to. This is about reading. What happens when our brains are reading words, text, I guess I should say, on a page or on a digital page or a hardcover book, like wherever, right? What happens is a process where our brain sees the word, it goes through an auditory processing center in our brain, then derives meaning from it. So no matter how good you are at reading, and this is going to actually surprise a lot of like if you show this to other people, even someone who's really good at reading, like someone who reads all the time, like, you know, bookworm, someone who reads as their hobby, they read like an hour or 2 hours a day in whatever language, doesn't matter. They'll tell you, oh no, I don't experience that. But it happens. So when your brain is reading text, it goes through an auditory processing filter and then derives meaning. When you become a really good reader, the speed at which your eyes see the words and then it goes through that auditory processing center and then derives meaning, it's so fast that it's unrecognizable to the human eye, so to speak. Like we don't notice it, right? Now, when you first start learning how to read, you start to pronounce things like kids, right? They pronounce the words and they go, oh, that's that word. Then they think of the meaning and then it's visualized. And that's how you learn to read. But no matter how good you are at reading, that always happens. That process happens through the the auditory processing center, right? That happens. That's why sometimes when you're reading, you'll kind of, again, I don't know the word for this in English, but it's called 속발음. 속발음 is when you're reading a book and you're kind of like mouthing it out because that part of your brain is always turned on. Why this is important is because if you think about when natives start to learn how to read, it's always when they're already fluent in their mother tongue, right? Babies aren't born, and the moment they're born, we don't start teaching them how to read, right? Some ambitious parents will try to teach their kids how to read way too early, and that's also not good. But when we all start to learn how to read our own native language, right, we have already spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours watching and listening to our mother tongue. And even a first grader, right, a kindergartner, think about how good a kindergartner is in their mother tongue, right? They speak so well. They are native like, they're fluent. Are they like a college student? Are they as eloquent as a college student? No. But I bet we all wish we were as good at in Korean as a kindergartner, a Korean kindergartner, right? Think about how good they are at Korean. If you were to talk to a kindergartner in Korean, or just a kindergartner in your own mother tongue, right? Think about how good they are. Why? Because if they're, I don't know what age they usually are, but let's say 5 years old, they've been spending 5 years straight of just watching people speak, watching their language on television and listening to it. And that's all they've been doing. Watching and listening, watching and listening, watching and listening. So by the time they are actually taught how to read the language that they're about to read, they already know so much. They already have a bank, the vocabulary bank that's just sitting in their head. It's insane how much vocabulary they have. So think about when you start to learn to read. Are you starting to learn to, like when natives start to learn how to read in their own language, are they learning words they don't know? No. They're learning how to read words they already know, right? Why? Because reading is based on the idea that we already have the language in our head and we're just trying to decode a physical depiction of it, which is text, right? So it's like if you know the word apple, right? And a kid knows the word apple. When they're taught how to read apple, we're just telling them APPLE represents both this sound and this idea. So the sound of apple and the idea of what an apple is. Kids aren't taught how to read words that they don't know. That would be ridiculous. That wouldn't be helpful. That'd be that really arduous sort of process. So always, when you look at how kids learn to read language, one, they've already been exposed to their mother tongue for thousands of hours, thousands. And how? Through visual audio stimulus. Watching their parents talk, watching shows on TV, watching their neighbors talk, watching their friends talk. Yes, it's partaking in dialogue as well, obviously. But it's always watching and listening. That's how kids get their input. They've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of input, right? And what kind of input? Visual audio. Is that the right word? I don't know. Visual audio. My English is terrible. So what happens when you're a learner of a foreign language? What do we do? Oh, let's start reading right away. That makes no sense. Why would you do that? It's completely the opposite way of how our brains are meant to acquire language. Imagine an infant was born and we didn't just fill their brains with visual audio stimulus, and instead we were like, here's just letters on a page. I don't want to use the word moronic, but that's the word that's popping into my head. It's ridiculous. So we, as people who want to get to native-like fluency, we should mirror what natives do. And what do natives do? Visual audio stimulus for thousands and thousands and thousands of hours. Then, once we're actually pretty good at the language, let's call it fluent, right? If a Korean kindergartner speaks to you, we could call them fluent, right? They're so good at speaking their own mother tongue already, even as a kindergartner, right? They have no problem with grammar. I mean, let's not say no problem. I'm being, hyperbolic, but really, they have no problem with grammar. They know how to express themselves. They don't really come across too many issues when they're trying to communicate with their peers, right? And so that's what we should do, right? That's what we should do. When I learned, when I learned Korean, obviously I went through, and I have a whole video on how I learned Korean. So if you want the specific details, you could just watch that video on this podcast or listen to it on this podcast. But like I always say, a lot of people, well, you started to learn Korean by learning Hangul. I'm like, yeah, and I regret it because it would have taken me 1,000 less wasted hours to get to the level of Korean I'm at now. I'd rather not waste time. Just because someone did something, right, like trial and error, just because someone had a lot of errors doesn't mean you should follow it. And also, most people aren't going to be able to spend the amount of time I spent on Korean. I spent, like 7 hours a day for like 3 years straight, 4 years straight, like obsessively. Most people don't have that time. And out of that time, again, the majority of it was audio input at first and then visual. And so for Japanese right now, I'm learning Japanese right now. And this is just a quick little thing about how I'm learning Japanese. I've been learning Japanese seriously, I would say, for about 2.5 years now. But the funny thing is, it's not a number one priority in my life, like the way Korean was when I first started learning Korean. It's up there, it's interesting, but it's not a number one priority. But for the past 2.5 years, there have been gaps of like months where I put in no time at all. Like there'd be 3 months where I did like 10 minutes a day. And then there'd be like 4 months here where I did like an hour, 2 hours a day. But for the past 2.5 years, it just hasn't been a priority. And so I haven't really been putting in time. Let's just call it average 20 minutes a day. All I've been doing is watching and listening. No reading at all. Zero. Why? Because it's not effective. And eventually I do want to get to a native level in Japanese. So I want to avoid all the bad things that happen when you learn to read first. And one of the worst things that can happen when you start learning a language by reading is every time you listen to the language, your brain doesn't visualize it. It visualizes the letters and it tries to spell things out. And so if you're someone who every time you're listening to Korean and you don't know a word and you start to think, and all you see is like Korean letters and you're trying to sound it out, this is the biggest sign that you've been doing it wrong. And I don't mean that you haven't been working hard, it just means you've been doing it wrong. Because you should not be, right now when I'm speaking English, if you're a native English speaker, you're not visualizing each individual letter of the things that I'm saying. You're visualizing kind of what I'm saying, right? The meaning behind it. You're getting like direct meaning from it. So when you hear new Korean words as well, your brain should be visualizing it. And not always, but whatever the main thing you do, whatever the main daily like routine you have with Korean, that's going to be the thing that's at the forefront of the way you think in Korean as well, right? So let's say if you have an hour a day to study, I don't like using the word study. I'd rather just say learn. But let's say you learn Korean for an hour a day, and 45 minutes of that is spent reading, and you're like new, like you're not a high level. Let's just say like you're more beginner side. Then that means the majority of what you're doing is reading, and that's going to be the thing that you're always relating Korean to, right? So every time you hear Korean, it's like, oh, I don't understand this. If the majority of your time spent was like 45 minutes a day of reading and 15 minutes of watching movies or dramas without subtitles, the first thing your brain is going to do is jump to the reading, jump to the letters, because that's what you've conditioned yourself to do. You haven't conditioned yourself to visualize what the meaning of the audio, like the words are. So, but if, for an hour every day you are watching Korean, and there's no text, no reading involved at all, then what your brain does when it hears Korean, boom, it goes to visualizing what is being said, opposed to the actual letters that are being spelled out. And so if you're someone who every time you're hearing Korean and you hear a new word, you hear something and you don't understand it, and your brain goes to, oh, how's that spelled? Or, oh, what does that mean in English? You've been doing something wrong, and it's time to get rid of that bad habit. So the habit you want is hear Korean and new words, visualize like visual imagery in Korean. Like, what does this word mean? You should be visualizing something. The only way you can make that happen is by conditioning yourself to see and watch Korean as much as possible. So for Japanese, that's what I do. I'm watching anime, I'm watching dramas, I'm watching movies with no subtitles, no captions, nothing, just raw, right? Just watching that. So now when I'm listening to Japanese, you know what happens? My brain, it can't go to any of the spelling. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what Japanese, like hiragana, furigana, katakana, and hanta. Is that right? Hantao? I don't know. My Korean brain is going to the hunt, like the characters. That can't pop up in my brain. Why? Because I don't condition myself. Like, I actively avoid that. The only thing I've conditioned my Japanese ears to do is watch and listen. So anytime I hear a word, the thing I'm kind of visualizing, if it's like new or if it's like familiar, it goes to all the shows that I've been watching, right? It goes to all those shows that I've been watching because it remembers that, oh yeah, you heard this word in this show, or you've heard that thing before in that show. And so that's what you have to do. That's what you have to do. Once I get to a fluent level, like, a pretty decent level of Japanese where the things that I'm listening to and watching are relatively like understandable, like the majority of it's understandable, like that of a kindergartner or a first grader, then I'll start to read, because at that point I will have amassed so much vocabulary naturally, which is easiest for our brains, and it's faster than anything else too, faster than studying. Then I'll start to read, because then that's how you bring your vocabulary skills to the next level. But you should start with watching and listening. And watching and listening are different. Watching just means whether you're in the country, hanging out at a cafe, and your Korean friends are speaking Korean and you're watching and listening at the same time. That's what I call watching. Watching just means using your eyes to understand the language, right? So if you're watching a movie, if you're watching a drama, if you're watching a YouTube video without subtitles, then you're watching. And watching always has listening as a part of it, but listening does not. You can listen to a podcast, you can listen to an audiobook, but there's no visual stimulus going in. So it's really hard for beginners to actually attach any meaning to just that audio, which is why the most important thing you should do as a beginner is watch. And so in the digital world is great because you could literally watch anything on your phone. You have access to anything on your phone. Every single content that could possibly be consumed is on your phone. So there's no excuse, right? And our brains don't really know the difference between the digital and IRL, the real world, once you start getting in a flow state. But I'll say this. If you think, oh, I can only hear something once I've turned the subtitles on, that means you have bad listening. You have poor listening skills. Why? Because you've conditioned yourself to not actually try to listen to stuff. And it is harder to listen to stuff than read stuff. Why? If you have a sentence on a page, you could take so much time to just break down what that means, right? You have more time to break it down. But a sentence that's spoken, it's boom here and then it vanishes within a second. And that's a much harder skill to develop. And if you want to develop that skill, then you should be doing that thing, right? It's like, oh, I can't hear Korean without subtitles, or without English or without Korean subtitles. So yeah, probably because you haven't been doing that. How many hours a day have you just been listening to raw Korean, natural Korean, dramas, movies, podcasts, audiobooks? How many hours a day do you spend just doing that and not looking stuff up and just training your ears through a visual audio context? Probably not a lot. And that's why you can't hear, right? That's why you can't hear. That's why every time you turn on a subtitle or captions, you're like, oh yeah, that's that word. Well, because you've probably been spending most of your time reading. So do the reverse, right? Don't learn, if you're new to Korean or any language, don't learn the alphabet until you're actually good at the language. And I'll say probably out of 100 people, maybe 2 or 3 people will take this advice seriously and go, oh my God, yeah, I can't, no wonder I haven't been able to hear Korean, but I can read it. It's because I've been spending all my time trying to read it and spending no time just trying to hear it. And I'll tell you one other thing that this might sound kind of, what's the word, like harsh, but I personally think if you're someone who reads more than anything else, I'll say this. If you're not spending, let's say if you wanted to start doing this, right, and spend the next year just watching stuff with no subtitles, nothing, raw, watch it raw for like an hour a day. At first, you're not going to be able to put in an hour a day because it's too much on your brain. It's too hard. You spend 10 minutes watching something with no subtitles. It's so hard. That's fine. And that's a good sign. It's just like working out. You can't do 100 push-ups the first day you try to start doing push-ups. Probably only do 5 or 10. Eventually, you'll be able to do 100. But then at that point, continue that 100 for a year straight, right? And your listening skills will become really, really good because all you've been doing is training your listening skills. If every time you don't understand something that's spoken to you, you turn on a subtitle, well, now you've quit basically, right? And it's much harder to spend an hour watching and listening to something that you don't understand than reading it. It's so much harder. Like physically, it's so much harder. And then mentally, it's taxing. It's not easy at first. But you could do it if you try. But I'll say this. People who say, you know what? I'm going to watch like a bunch of raw material, YouTube, Netflix, whatever it may be. I'm going to watch a bunch of raw material without subtitles, without reading. I'm going to stop reading for a bit because I need to build my ambiguity tolerance, which I have another video on. And, I've been reading this whole time thinking that this is the right way to learn a language. It's not. This is why the majority of foreign language education in the schooling system is let's just call it awful, because it's all based on reading. It's not based on, and even if it's listening, you never watch and listen at the same time. Watching is the most important thing. Training your eyes to understand what's being heard. That's the most important thing. Watch. Then on your downtime, when you're, at the store, getting groceries, when you're working out, then you listen. Then you just listen. But watching and listening are very different things. Watching always involves listening. Listening does not involve watching. Watching always involves listening, and this is the most powerful tool you could do to build your fluency from day one as a beginner. So if you've been reading Korean because you've heard that learning Hangul is so easy. No, it's not. Because if it was easy, you'd be you'd be reading books, you'd be devouring books. But you're probably not devouring books because reading is not easy. It's not a natural thing that happens. And every time you learn to read, you're probably also translating the words into English. You're probably also, you're not actually reading, right? You're not actually reading. Reading involves consuming stuff through the language itself. And so I think the thing is, it's tough because you will not be able to 공감. You won't be able to 공감 relate. You'll not be able to relate to the things I'm saying until you've actually done it, and that's the hardest part. But if you spend the next few months just watching stuff with no subtitles, none, right? And you put down reading. If you only have an hour a day to spend on Korean, all you should be doing, and if you have an hour of focused time, meaning you could sit down for an hour, just watch stuff, raw material, YouTube, Netflix, TVing, whatever you want to watch. Just watch it. Make sure it's content that you're actually interested in. Don't think about the difficulty of it. It just has to be interesting to you. And if it's not interesting, the moment it becomes uninteresting, go to the next video, the next drama, whatever. But do that. And do that until you become addicted to it. Do that until that voice in your head that goes, I can't understand, I want to turn on subtitles, goes away. It might take a while because you might have conditioned yourself to read every time you don't understand something. But I'll say, it's so fun and so valuable once you get there. Then all of a sudden you're gonna be like, wow, I'm actually pretty good at Korean because I watch and listen to it all the time, and that's what I've conditioned myself to do. So then when you speak to your friends who are Korean in Korean, you go, wait a minute, why are conversations all of a sudden so much easier? And how do I know how to say these things? It's because generally speaking, if you're watching a movie, a drama, a YouTube video, those are generally harder than everyday conversation. Everyday conversation isn't too difficult. People don't use vocabulary that's too difficult. So I would say that if you're choose content that you want to watch because it's interesting, because the Peiyu, the actor or the actress is handsome or beautiful, or maybe they're an idol and now they're in a show and you just love watching their stuff. Watch that. Watch it with no subtitles. Watch how their mouths move. Watch their facial expressions. Watch their body language. Look for clues in the background, what they're talking about. If you're brand new to Korean, don't do this maybe. But if you've been learning Korean for a while, turn on audio description on Netflix. Audio description shows exactly what's going on the screen. And actually, if you want to know what audio description is, watch this next video because I'm going to explain why audio description is one of the most powerful tools that you could turn on as a beginner, even if you don't understand a lot of Korean, and why it's such a powerful tool.